let me share my screen. We can go through linting. So can everybody see my screen? I guess that's the usual thing that people ask at this time.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Cool. So yeah, today I shall be talking about linting and how to improve and enforce standards within your code base. So I was actually planning to give this talk about a year ago in Reading, but something happened that sort of just scuppered those plans. I can't remember what it was now. But I have also done a blog post on the subject, and I was on a podcast, on the Front End podcast with Rob Kendall. I'll link to those at the end if you'd like to read up a bit more about that. So a little bit about me. My name is Bertrand. You can find me on Twitter at DesignPuddle. I'm a senior developer. I've worked at a range of companies. I'm at Spire currently, across a range of industries from banking to social housing, travel, HR, and now healthcare. Focused on .NET primarily. I'm really excited about Blazor and the possibilities that brings. But I've also worked on the Salesforce platform and with Angular too. I'm always keen to implement process, automate tasks, and improve communication within teams. And code quality is something I think is very important too. And that's where this talk on linting comes in. So just a quick overview of what we will be covering. What is it, why you should use it, and how you can enforce it. So lint, this lovely stuff here, is derived from the name of undesirable bits of fiber and fluff found in sheep's wool. And that comes off your clothes when it's no longer useful or necessary to them. And linting is the process of removing this no longer useful, undesirable, or unnecessary stuff. And by stuff, we are talking about code in this instance. And the linting is a process of checking your code against a set of predetermined rules. So linting itself will run a program or a tool that will analyze your code for potential problems around these rules that you have enforced. It will give you back some warnings or some errors with guidance on how to fix them. So let's look at the pros and cons, the benefits. I guess the biggest benefit of using linting is it can do a lot, but it can also be configured to do just what you need it to. So syntax errors, as well as sort of variable mistypes, are really quickly identified. And unless you're using Notepad to do your coding, you're probably using some form of linting already. Every programming language is different, but there are similarities that will occur in them all. I think the easiest way to demonstrate the benefits of linting is if you were to ask a sort of .NET developer, backend developer, how to assign a variable in JavaScript. Now, many would probably still say, yeah, you use a var. And in C#, var is a keyword for declaring a variable, so it makes sense. But if you had a linter in your JavaScript code, that would probably tell you nowadays to be using a let or a const. Now, when ES5 came out in 2009, which was a long time ago, it was 6 years until ES6 came out in 2015. And that's when a lot of changes were made. Let and const came out, the fat arrows, the structuring, the for of loops. There was a whole load of changes. But if you haven't been sort of keeping up to date with that, you don't necessarily know all of these things that are coming in. But if you had linting in place during that transition period, it would have told you pretty much the next day that these are the things that you can now use instead of what you've got. These are the new standards that have been implemented in the JavaScript world. And that's the really powerful thing. It's a teaching and upskilling tool, as well as something that can clean your code. It never stands still. When new language features come out, your linters upgrade too. Now, a lot of companies will have coding guidelines in place in a document stored somewhere on a share in the middle of nowhere that you have to go find. But if your style and guidelines, coding guidelines, are within your code, it's never going to diverge. It will never require someone to update it because it's there for everyone to see. Lastly, linting tools can pick up slightly more tricky things to spot, issues such as leaving your code open to security flaws, such as cross-site scripting, SQL injection. Linting will also help showing you these problems if you're not aware of them and solutions available to you. But it's not all good. There can be some drawbacks. Linting can produce a lot of errors. It can pretty much give you an error for every single line of code you've got if you want it to. So setting up those rules in the first place can be quite time consuming, and you need to agree as a team on what those rules are, whether you want semicolons at the end, brackets on the same line on the other line, and that can be a little bit painful. It can also take a bit of a toll on developer productivity because in the end, you're going to be asking your developers to make some changes to the code because it doesn't quite fit. And that's obviously going to take a bit of time. But probably the most important drawback is that although it will tell you there's a problem, it won't necessarily let you know the best way to fix it. So linting can flag things such as cyclomatic complexity. It's a big word, but in essence, it's just if your function is too big, if it's got too many branching paths, linting will basically say, you shouldn't have this many, this function is too complicated, can you please split it up? But it's not going to tell you exactly how to do that. It's not going to tell you which bits should come out, how you should be constructing them, how you can make it smaller, more manageable, etc. So there are some tools across different languages. There are lots actually. JavaScript has ESLint and TSLint. TSLint is now deprecated, but I think it's still used quite a lot within the industry. C# has the Roslyn compiler, which does a lot, but also StarCop and FXCop. We shouldn't forget about HTML and CSS. That usually is sort of downgraded as a programming language that people don't, you just chuck it in there and it works. But screen readers, semantic HTML is really important for accessibility. So making sure that you've got the right tags, you've got the right alt tags, you've got the right things in place is really big to improve those scores and make your site or app accessible to everyone. I've put Prettier down here, not necessarily a linter, it's more of a code formatter, but it's really useful to just have a consistent style throughout your code base. JetBrains has some plugins. PyCharm is used for Python, ReSharper for .NET, and then there are multiples of sort of cloud-based solutions that will take care of all of your code. SonarQube, SonarCloud, etc., which I'll be going through a little bit in a bit. So having all of these is really great, but enforcing them is the tricky bit. And how do we do that? Judge Dredd, the king of enforcement. So enforcement is usually connected with negative connotations. It's not great, right? It's someone stopping you from doing something. And that's why it's actually a really important subject to discuss, because you need to get buy-in from your team. And it's really tricky. You need to proposition this in a way that it's for the greater good. It's going to improve maintainability, keep your code clean, consistent. You want people to find it useful. You want them to benefit from it in some way. And you can use linting throughout the development lifecycle. As I said, you can have it in your IDE. It can be on your server, so you can have reports running on it, and people can see how your code's faring. But you can also have it in your CI/CD pipeline. You could have it within your pull requests. So messages can go into your pull requests that note this down, so people are not constantly looking for small issues within your pull requests. It's the big important stuff that's there. And equally, you can do it at the earliest stage where it won't even let you commit your code up to the repository. So when I first enforced linting into a development process. It was for a team of approximately 30 devs. And I got a whole load of grief, and quite rightly so, because I did not do it the right way. I put in a pre-commit hook into the sort of process. So when a developer wanted to push their changes, linting was run on the whole code base. Now, this was a legacy app that we had, that linting had never taken place. It would take minutes to run. And there were thousands of errors and warnings coming back, where 99% of them weren't actually related to what that developer was currently doing. So I didn't ask anyone to fix anything. It was just here's some issues, thinking that, you know, people will want to make it better. But in fact, they sort of didn't. They just had it as a step that you just had to do, and then you carried on. So it wasn't really enforcing anything. It was just putting barriers in place. So how did I actually do this to make it useful for the team? And this is where we're going to see something in action. Live demos, always fun. So here is Visual Studio Code. I think everyone can see that. And I've got an Angular app, which I quickly got running last week. So here it's just running. I'll show you that it all compiles and it works. And here it is, lint demo app is running. So we can see that the application works. It does what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean it agrees with our standards. If I was to open up the console, you can see there is a console.log that's been left here saying, hello, programmed in pencil. Great, it's like I knew I was coming. Now, console.log statements, it's not the end of the world having them in there, but it's not always professional. It can potentially leak data or anything. So we probably don't want them in our release code. So let's look at the source and see how we can enforce this. So here I have my package.json file. As I said, this was just a scaffolded Angular application, which I've made a few tweaks to. So first up, there's a package called Husky, which I've installed. That is an easy way to configure Git hooks. So these hooks, which run during different processes of committing up to your Git repository. When you install Husky, it creates you a default hook, which is pre-commit, which is usually the best time to do things, but there are lots of others. Another tool called lint staged. So this will run your linting, but only on your staged files. So no longer covering the whole code base, which developer doesn't care about. The final package is pretty quick, and that will run prettier on your files too. So this gives you the sort of trifecta of what you want. You've got your hook coming in, you're linting your code, and you're prettifying it at the same time. Even on their own, these are really powerful, but if you put them together, you know, you can get a lot done. So here what you can see is in my pre-commit hook, I will run pretty quick, but only on my staged files, and run the lint staged command. That will run tslint in this case, because I'm using TypeScript and an Angular here, and will fix anything it can for me. So tiny errors, things that the linter can automatically fix for you, I'm saying, do that for me straight away. So where do these rules come from? So here I've got my rule set. I'm extending from the tslint sort of base rule set and the Angular rule set. And I've pulled in this config prettier rule set as well, because tslint does actually prettify code as well, but prettier is better at it. So you can kind of tell it not to do that. And in here, there are a few rules. There's quite a lot, but I've marked a few that are kind of easy to understand. So we're saying here that no console, that basically console statements are not allowed. And you can specify all the different types of console, log, debug, table, I can't remember whichever ones that there are there. And equally, semicolons should be added to the end of each line, because in JavaScript, it's not actually necessary if you don't want it to be. And as I said, all these rules are down to you. These are the default set. a little bit. We then have our prettier configuration, which is saying the size of the length of the line that we'll be doing. Git hooks and Husky. I just wanted to go into this really quickly. In your Git folder, which will be on your repository, there's always this hooks folder, which is actually a hidden folder, but you'll be able to view it if you wanted to. Pre-commit hooks, if we were to look at a sample, is just a shell script for doing something, whatever you want that to do. Now, if we were to look at the pre-commit hook now, or all the hooks actually, what Husky does is it basically says, just call Husky in each of these, and then that command will do whatever you've told it to do at that time. So it's just circumventing that process, but you can do that manually if you wanted to. Okay, so let's have a look at the code. This is it. There's only a few lines, but I just wanted to show, I guess, the simplicity of linting and what it can do. So this is a standard Angular app, and it's just, when it's loading up, it's doing some things that aren't actually very useful. And here you can see title is declared, but value is never read. That is the TypeScript linter, but that's in the IDE. And here is our horrible console.log line, which should probably be removed. So if I just go into my code and say that I want to commit these changes, I've just say I put in a few break lines here, change this value to 8.7, and now I want a third instead. I can save those files. We've got our HTML here. Say I'll add in something here. And I'm not really sure on how to position my semantics, so I add it strangely like this. So let's just go ahead and commit. Committing changes. So this is where the Git hook comes in, and Husky. And if I just make this a little bit bigger, we'll be able to see what's happened. So it runs the first step, which is the prettier on the files that we've changed. Tells you which files are there, and then it tries to lint the files. It starts running through, and it goes, uh-oh, we've come up against a problem. There are a number of rules here, which those rule sets don't adhere to. So triple equals is not used, console.log's not allowed, debugger's not allowed, values are not assigned, so you should probably be using const rather than let. It tells you everything here, and a life cycle change that hasn't been done. The cool thing is this welcome span, is this the one I did? This adding text has been prettified already. The random spaces that I've added into this file have also been removed. There were double quotes here that have been changed to single quotes, and any of those stylistic changes will happen to you automatically without someone having to do them. So let's say I get rid of the offending code, but I won't change the vars because I know that it can do that for me automatically, and I'll need to just implement the interface as it was telling me it was a problem. So now there's naturally nothing wrong offending with the code. So if I was to try and commit those changes again, I do believe I've removed everything. We'll see, you can actually see it in action. As it comes through, oh, treble equals, made a mistake. Half is never a thing. And this is, you can do this really quickly. So changes come in, you make your changes, you try and do your commits, rather than having this go up to a pull request, having it to come down, having it to go around all these circles. It happens before the developer's even done anything. These ones are still having issues. But in essence, I just want them to show it come through. And it can take a little bit of time to do this like this, but if you, as I said, if you're having that round trip every time with somebody looking at it, someone telling you that it's not quite right, that will spend a lot more time to get it right. And there we go. The files have gone in, everything's happy, our code is enforced, our styles are there. The last thing, a few minutes, is Sonar Cloud. So this is free for open source projects. It does the same thing. When you make a change to your repository, it will have a look here and it will tell you issues, major issues, code smells. It gives you the same thing, but from a different perspective. It tells you why it's an issue. It gives you examples underneath. As I said, it's a really useful tool to understand why your code is aligned to the standards that you've given it. Cool, thank you for listening. I hope you've found some of this useful. If you've never used linting before, then I hope you maybe have a try, or if you're using it but not enforcing it, then maybe that's something you can do too. I think we've got a couple of minutes, so if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That was really interesting. And actually, there were lots of sort of practical and relevant tips in that I think people can take away with them. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the Q&A. But in the meantime, I will kick things off and ask you a few questions. You mentioned that obviously when it comes to enforcement, this can be quite tricky because, you know, it involves sort of convincing the rest of your team and proposing putting forward these ideas. So how do you kind of handle any kind of disagreement between engineers around the rules? How do you approach this process of setting up the rules in the first place?
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and that's why I'm saying if you do it underhand, if you just throw them in and people aren't bought into the idea, then you're going to get a lot of pushback. And at the end of the day, it's a team-based thing. The team should agree to the rules that they want in their repository. So getting buy-in, having that discussion and agreeing to what you're doing is really the best way, pretty much the only way to make sure this works. And equally having it in such a way that it doesn't take a long time, it doesn't put a massive overhead on the developer's work, because you know everyone has their deadlines, everyone has their tasks they need to do, but you just really want this to improve it for everyone going forward.
Yeah, for sure. So has there been I don't know, a particular thing that you've wanted to make a rule around, or I don't know, you've not agreed with on?
You know, tabs versus spaces, that's a very popular argument that people have. At the end of the day, if the linting takes care of most of it, you can code however you want it to code. But when it goes up to your repository, it will be styled however the business or the repository owner or however they want it to run. So it's more of a case of keeping it consistent. And I think everybody, especially when you work in large teams, that consistency is key rather than having different ways of working.
Yeah, fair enough. On that, actually, do you prefer tabs or spaces?
I'm a tab sort of person myself.
Yeah, good choice. What kind of things do you think are sort of most important to configure rules around?
I kind of think the linting's there for around the security, around sort of stopping consoles from being leaked, because people create scripts. There are ways around that to remove consoles, but if you can do it in this way, it can save you a lot of time, and especially a lot of backtracking in terms of, oh, that's gone out, we now have to pull it back, we have to change it, patch it. So rules around those sorts of things I think are really important. The rest are sort of down to personal preference and things. There are, especially with Angular and Vue and React, the names of your components. So you can put linting rules around how a component should be named to follow guidelines, so people don't, you know, create strange rules or, you know, the wrong casing, or it's kind of there just to fit around what you want it to do rather than a set that's already there for you. Now, Airbnb and I think Google and a few others already have those rule sets that you can just use and plug into, but it's all dependent on what you're after.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. We have a couple of questions. One one from Faye. If there are too many lint errors, is it okay to just turn it off? I've waded through 50+ lint errors before, or was that really bad practice?
Well, this is the notion of only linting the files that you're changing, because if there are 50 lint errors in the file that you're changing, then yeah, that can happen. Maybe the linting rules are just too strict. Certain lint rules maybe you shouldn't be having on if you've got 50 lint rules errors there already. You can bypass it. You know, there are ways of bypassing the commit hooks. So it's not, you should never stop someone from committing their code if they have to. But the lint rules are there as a guidance. If those lint rules wouldn't be, you know, if a pull request wouldn't go in because of those lint rules, then they're valid errors. If they're not, they should probably be downgraded to warnings or things that won't stop your commit going in. And I think it's just finding that balance of, this is definitely not allowed, to, yeah, you could probably work on this, but if it needs to go in now, it needs to go in now.
Yeah. One from Otis. Is Husky easy to set up? And is there a lot of customization?
Husky's really easy. So I've linked to a blog here, and I'm on Dev2 as well. The steps are in there. It's a single npm install Husky. It does it all for you. The joy of it is it's very, very simple to set up to begin with. I think it's 3 commands. You run them all in tandem, and you're basically there.
Awesome. Have you added linting to a legacy project, and what were the drawbacks and cost to this?
Yeah, so as I said, the sort of main one that I referenced in the talk was a legacy product. It was an Angular JS application that had been upgraded to an Angular 2+ application, and you've got JS over one side, TS on the other side, and the errors everywhere as coding conventions have changed massively over those. So it's finding that balance. If it's not going to work, then maybe you go back, you fix the ones that you can, but you then only start linting going ahead when changing things. So you don't go back and fix everything, but you fix things incrementally while going forwards. I think it's the best approach, because you're never going to have a big bang of fixing all of your linting errors. That's not going to happen, but it's that small process of seeing those numbers drop and the code improve.
One from me. So I use the format on save function in VS Code. Just wondering what you think of sort of VS Code or the particular editor that you use, this inbuilt functionality.
Yeah, so that pretty quick command just uses prettier underneath the hood. So you right click and format thing will use that prettier config. We're just not making it specific to the IDE. We're having it as a dev dependency. So it will happen no matter if you have prettier installed on your machine. It will just run the rule set that is against it. If you have a different rule set that you're using while you're developing, then that's fine. But the moment it gets pushed up, it will use that rule set that is configured there. So a lot of those commands you can just run in the command window and just see how they work. All we're doing with the enforcement is making sure they're run, because usually you don't have to do it. And if you don't have to do it, most people won't, because an additional step is something that nobody really wants to do. So just have it integrated with how you usually commit your code, and then have it fix what it can, and then let you know about the things it can't.
Cool. I think we have a comment from Faye. My lint stops the page from rendering in dev. Is this maybe Nuxt related?
Stops the page from rendering in dev. I don't know, Faye. It could be. The linting shouldn't affect any of the code, because it's not changing anything. It's just letting you know what it's analyzed. There could be something that it's changed, perhaps, if you've got the -- fix on the end of it. If it's changed some of your code, then yeah, that would stop the page potentially from rendering. It's worth checking the console and see if anything's been brought up.
And a final one, do you prefer off-the-shelf rule sets or crafting your own? And any sort of favorite tools? Yeah.
I'd say to begin with, pick one that's off the shelf. Pick one from, as I said, there's Airbnb, which is a really popular one that was used, and then tweak it as you see fit. So pull one in that just does everything and is sort of sensible, and then look through your linting issues and sort of go, actually, we seem to do this. This seems to be our style. Even though if it's not explicitly your style, your coding guidelines, it seems to be in your code. So it probably is one of your coding guidelines. So make it, change the base rule set and add those in.
We actually do have another one from the audience. So Devold is asking, you mentioned making living specs for team coding standards. I really like that, but how would you apply this over a whole set of repos for a team and keep them up to date? Any good ways of ensuring the linting rules for a set of repos are up to date?
That's down to each repo, because I think the TypeScript latest, when you upgrade, when you install npm install and you upgrade thing, that will automatically pull in the latest set of linting rules. At the end of the day, when you upgrade Angular or upgrade any of your applications, you're probably going to upgrade the rule sets as well, because that's the way they come in. So each repo will, depends if you're going to have like a mono repo or things, you might be able to have a shared place to store your linting rules, but they're probably going to be different depending on the languages used, the different things that are in there. So I don't think you can have a single set of linting rules. I think they do need to be customized for each repository itself. You can have, and each, you have the TS lint JSON, you have, I think there's an ES lint JSON or a JS lint file. So each language as well will have a different set of linting rules as well. So it's not really as simple as just having a single set of rules that just cover everything.
Great. I think that's all our questions. Thanks so much, Chris. That was really useful.